Hello and welcome to your Portuguese. Today we are going to learn about the adjectives in Portuguese or adjetivos. In this lesson you are going to learn what is an adjective, what is its function, how it's classified, and how it's used in sentences. What is an adjective or adjetivo? In Portuguese, we use an adjective to characterize a substantive, giving it a quality. The adjectives are classified in simple or compound in Portuguese, and it's simple when it's composed by only one root word. Some examples are bom, which means good in English, and ruim, which means bad. And an adjective is compound when it's composed by two or more root words. Some examples are rosa claro, which means light pink, and azul escuro, which means dark blue. They can also be classified either as primary or derivative. When an adjective is primary, it means it's not derived by any other word. One example can be claro, which means light, or feliz, which means happy. When an adjective is derivative, it means it derives from other word such as a substantive or an adjective. For example, felicidade. Felicidade, which means happiness in English. Or bondade. Bondade, which means goodness in English. Felicidade derives from feliz, as we saw in the example of the primary adjective, and bondade derives from bom, as we saw in the example of the simple adjective. They can also be classified by gender, and when they are classified by gender, they are either uniform or biform. Uniform adjectives have only one form to qualify both masculine and feminine substantives. For example, dia ruim, bad day in English. Estrada ruim, bad road. Dia is a masculine substantive, and estrada is a feminine substantive. But we can use the adjective ruim to qualify both of them, even though they are not in the same form. One is masculine and the other is feminine. A biform adjective is the one that has to be inflected in order to qualify a masculine and feminine substantive. For example, menino bom, good boy. Menina boa, good girl. You can see that when the adjective bom is used with a masculine substantive, we keep the form bom. However, when we use it with a feminine substantive, which always ends in the letter A, then you have to change it, you have to inflect it. Menina boa, you can see it here. So the biform adjective has to be changed based on the gender, if it's masculine or if it's feminine. They can also be classified by number, being either singular or plural. When it's singular, it qualifies only one being, one object, or a set of beings. For example, casa grande, big house. When it's plural, it qualifies more than one being or more than one object. For example, casas grandes, big houses. As you see, the plural in Portuguese is not that hard. In most of the cases, you just have to add the letter S in the end of the word, in the end of the adjective. Here we have the classification by degree. We have the degree we call comparative, which is divided into equality, superiority, and inferiority. When we talk about equality, we are comparing one person to the other who have the same quality. So we say, for example, Carlos é tão alto quanto Davi, which in English means Carlos is as tall as Davi. You can see here that the as formula in English can be used as tão quanto in Portuguese. When we use superiority in Portuguese, we want to express that someone has, let's say, a better quality than the other person. For example, Carlos é mais alto que Davi, which in English is Carlos is taller than Davi. Usually, we just put the word mais before the adjective. Mais means more, so Carlos é mais alto que Davi. When we use inferiority, we want to say that someone has, let's say, less quality than the other person. So we'll say in Portuguese, Carlos é menos alto que Davi, which means Carlos is less tall than Davi in English. And you can see that to say less tall, we use menos alto in Portuguese. Usually you just have to use the word menos, which means less, to use the inferiority to say that someone has some quality in less amount, let's say like this, than the other person, or that one object is less something than the other object. We can also classify an object based on the superlative degree, which can be divided into analytic absolute, synthetic absolute. Both mean the same thing, they are just two different ways to express the same thing. The first one is easier and more similar to English, so if you want to learn one of them, I would advise you to learn the first one. It's easier, it's very similar to English. Let's see the example. Maria é muito bonita. Maria is very beautiful. Muito means very, bonita means beautiful. So you can see it's like almost the same thing. You just have to add the word muito, which means very, before an adjective, and you turn it into very something. Muito bonita, very beautiful. In the other example, we say Maria é belíssima, which means muito bonita, but it's a synthetic way to say muito bonita. It's like a, let's say, one word that contracts the muito and the adjective, but then you are going to need to learn these specific words for every adjective. And I guess that for a very beginner, that's not really a good idea. You should learn first the analytic absolute way to say things, or maybe even only this way to say things. It's more similar to English, and it's still correct. Everyone is going to understand you. And to be honest, the second way, the synthetic absolute, is not so used in Portuguese, not even by native Portuguese speakers. We still have the relative degree that's divided into analytic relative of superiority, synthetic relative of superiority, and relative of inferiority. The analytic relative of superiority, or relativo de superioridade analítico, is similar to English. Let's see some example so that we can see it better. Maria é a mais bonita de todas. Maria is the most beautiful of all. When you wish to say that something is the best or the most beautiful or anything like that, you do something similar to what we have already seen. You put the word mais before the adjective. However, in the end you have to add this de todas, which means of all, so that it can be clear that you are trying to say that that person is the most beautiful of all, or that that car is the most pretty of all, or anything like that. So mais, adjective, de todos or de todas. Here in this case it's todas because it's a girl, it's a feminine substantive, so that's why it's de todas, but it could be de todos if the substantive were masculine. The synthetic relative of superiority is very similar to the other one, but as the name says, it's synthetic, so you don't need the word mais. You have a synthetic way to express it. You cannot say, for example, we have here, este filme é o melhor de todos. This movie is the best of all. Same way you cannot say, this movie is the most good of all in English. That's wrong. You cannot say, este filme é o mais bom de todos in Portuguese. That's not correct. You have to use a specific word that express what you want to say in Portuguese in some cases. So if I were you, I would search specifically this, the synthetic relative of superiority in Portuguese, or relativo de superioridade, sintético, so that you can learn like the most used words that are used in this case, so that you can speak a better Portuguese. So don't say mais bom, mais ruim, it's melhor, or in the case of mais ruim, it's pior. There are specific ways to say it, so try to learn this. I can prepare some material, some PDF, so that you can download and you can learn this, but let's see it in the future. And as the last one, we have the relative of inferiority, or relativo de inferioridade. One example is Marcos é o menos alto de todos. In this case, it's very similar to English. Marcos is the less tall of all. It's easier than the synthetic relative of superiority, and very similar to the analytic relative of superiority, but let's say the contrary, because here you don't use the word mais, you use the word menos to indicate that someone has quality in less degree, let's say it, than another person or one object related to another object. Marcos é o menos alto de todos. You just add the word menos, the adjective, and in the end, de todos. Here you see that it ends with OS, de todos, because Marcos is a masculine substantive. So by now you should know what is an adjective, what is its function, how it's classified, and how it's used in sentences in Brazilian Portuguese. Muito obrigado.
If you think this video was useful for you, share it on your social medias and help other people to learn Portuguese as well. Show us some love too, leaving your like on the video, and if you have some suggestion or constructive criticism, leave it in the comments area.